Hello and welcome to the U.S. Center. This event is Unlocking Adaptation, Water as the Key to Climate Action. And now I'm excited to welcome to the stage Jennifer Littlejohn, Acting Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs at the Department of State. Let's give her a warm welcome, everyone.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, yeah, that's good. I like that. Wow. Well, it's a pleasure to be here at the U.S. Center to discuss a critical issue, and that's water as the key to climate action. Most people will first experience the impacts of climate change through water, either too much or too little. While flooding is increasing, water scarcity is also a growing problem. Now, my team at the State Department leads U.S. diplomatic efforts on international water issues and works with partners around the world. Just as importantly, we work with agencies and departments across the U.S. government on this issue, many of which are represented here today. I thought that was like feedback. I was like, that's really okay. Over the next hour, you will hear from some of the foremost experts in their fields about what the United States is doing to advance water security and climate resilience at home and around the world. More importantly, they will explain how water is a key to unlocking climate adaptation efforts. Water security is a United States priority at home and abroad, and it shows by the size of our investment in water and by the way some of the best minds in the U.S. government have come together to tackle the problem. They are from agencies tasked with science, satellites, data and analytics, infrastructure, environment, development finance, and of course, diplomacy. This level of broad commitment comes from the top. President Biden made climate resilience a priority and has taken historic steps to strengthen global water security. Last year, the White House released the first ever action plan on global water security, which elevated water security as a foreign policy priority. To take this plan forward, President Biden's U.S. global water strategy is fully aligned with the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, or PREPARE, a whole of government effort to help more than 500 million people in developing countries adapt to and manage the impacts of climate change. PREPARE and the Global Water Security Strategy provide a framework to help prevent water risk from being magnified by climate change. These strategy documents formalize what we know to be true, that water is where climate change impacts are felt the most. Climate change increases stress on global water resources and worsens inequality, increases economic strain, produces negative health and health security outcomes, and increases the likelihood that water insecurity will become a driver of or trigger of instability and subsequent conflict. Around the world, including in the United States, water crises are becoming more frequent and intense. There are more cases of serious flooding and more areas afflicted by drought. Often, both occur in the same region, like in the upper Mississippi this spring, where floods were immediately followed by drought. As it reduced the overall flow of the Mississippi River, the drought dramatically reduced the ability to ship goods on the river. It has also caused saltwater intrusion down in the Mississippi Delta, forcing residents in some communities to resort to drinking bottled water instead of water out of the tap. All this takes a terrible toll, straining infrastructure, institutions, and communities. Making things worse, underinvestment and lack of maintenance can lead to some of the most vulnerable communities being deprived of safe drinking water. This is why, during the 2023 UN Water Conference in New York, Secretary of Interior Holland, on behalf of the United States, announced commitments of over $49 billion for domestic and international actions on water security. These are once-in-a-generation investments. They pay for water conservation and resilience planning, water storage and conveyance, watershed health and management, and drought resilience. Through this work, we are also seeking to secure environmental justice and confront decades of underinvestment in disadvantaged communities. As we work towards a climate-resilient future for our children and grandchildren, we need to transform water systems to meet not only today's demands, but the demands of a future that is increasingly difficult to predict. Now, our experts here today have all helped chart the U.S. efforts on these issues. They will speak to how we plan to navigate current and future challenges. They're going to tell you about what we know, what are we going to do now, and how we plan to pay for it. That's pretty critical. Now, I look forward to the discussion and will now invite the moderator, Department of Interior's Assistant Secretary for Fish and Wildlife and Parks, Shannon Estenes, to the stage. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, Assistant Secretary Littlejohn. I'm unfortunately of an age where I have complicated eyewear infrastructure myself. Today's panel discussion will focus on unlocking adaptation, recognizing how water is a key part of climate action, and building resilience, including implementing PREPARE, President Biden's emergency plan for adaptation and resilience, in which the President pledged to work with Congress to provide $3 billion in adaptation finance annually for PREPARE by fiscal year 2024. Now, we've brought together a range of participants to showcase the whole of government and whole of society approach to PREPARE and to highlight how water plays a key role in the U.S. government's adaptation efforts at home and abroad. Now, before I invite our panelists to join me on stage, I want to just talk a little bit about the work of the Interior Department and how it plays a critical role in support of PREPARE's mission to help people adapt to and manage the impacts of climate change. Let me start with the U.S. Geological Survey and its Landsat program. Through USGS's Landsat program, the department is helping collect images of Earth's geologic formations, natural habitats, farmland, cities, lakes, glaciers, coastlines, and other surface features. This data is helping track land use and document land change due to climate change, urbanization, drought, wildfire, biomass changes, and a host of other natural and human-caused changes. The critical information collected by Landsat is helping support USAID and their famine early warning system. Next, our International Trade Assistance Program, or ITAP. Through Interior's ITAP program, we are helping to build capacity in other countries, drawing from the diverse expertise of Interior employees. Capacity building includes on-site technical assistance, U.S.-based training, and one-on-one mentoring. To date, ITAP activities have worked with more than 60 countries across the world. We've offered technical assistance on a variety of issues and areas, including wildlife management, law enforcement, indigenous peoples, mitigation and management of natural disasters, energy, mining, and water management. In partnership with the U.S. Department of State, the department also oversees the Ambassador's Water Experts Program, a tool for sharing U.S. water expertise with partners around the world in support of the U.S. Global Water Strategy. Since its launch in 2018, the Ambassador's Water Experts Program has provided technical assistance to more than 20 countries and continues to manage more than a dozen activities across 4 continents. Finally, domestically, the department is engaged in a variety of initiatives to bolster climate resilience for communities impacted by the effects of the climate crisis. Just for example, earlier this year, the department announced over $44 million from President Biden's Investing in America agenda to meet critical ecosystem resilience, restoration, and environmental planning needs for the National Park Service in fiscal year 2023. These investments will be guided by the department's Restoration and Resilience Framework to support coordination across agency programs and ensure collaborative, strategic, and measurable landscape-scale benefits that advance climate resilience. Through President Biden's Investing in America agenda, The department's Bureau of Reclamation is also helping communities address the impacts of climate. In September, the department announced up to $328 million in funding opportunities for water recycling, water storage, and desalination projects. And these are just a few examples. We really could spend all day talking about the great work that we're doing in this space. Through President Biden's Investing in America agenda, we're delivering historic resources to make communities more resilient to climate change. Combined, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and in the Inflation Reduction Act represent the largest investments in climate resilience in the nation's history and provide unprecedented resources to support the administration's comprehensive all-of-government approach. The department is committed to ensuring communities in America and across the globe have the tools and resources necessary to manage the impacts of climate change. So with that, let me invite our esteemed panelists to join me on the stage to begin our discussion. All right. So that's better. So just to introduce our panelists very briefly, I'm joined today by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Assistant Secretary, Dr. Michael Morgan. Welcome, sir. From USAID, Assistant Administrator for Resilience, Environment, and Food Security, Dina Esposito. From the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Senior Advisor Jerry Adamson. And from Water Equity, the CEO, Gary White. We'll also be joined by a closing speaker at the end of the panel, who we'll introduce after the discussion. All right. Excuse me. Okay. I apologize. Okay. Yes. All right. First, we're going to start with pillar one of preparing knowledge, because information is power. As we know, 1/3 of the global population, including 60% of people in Africa, do not currently have access to or the ability to use early warning and climate information services to make informed decisions on how to address climate risks. NOAA has some of the most advanced data information services and platforms collecting data on weather and climate. How is NOAA improving observations and monitoring of drought, floods, water levels, water quality, and other related water and climate impacts to improve climate services, including early warning systems?
Thank you for that question. Water is woven throughout NOAA's three-part mission of science, service, and stewardship. Science at NOAA is the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the climate system, the ocean, atmosphere, and related ecosystems. It's a broad scope that includes the science of the global hydrologic cycle. First, science at NOAA is the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the ocean, atmosphere, and related ecosystems, a broad scope that includes, as I said, the global hydrologic cycle. Second, in executing its service mission, NOAA provides a range of Earth observations and scientific data sets, as well as information including water reports, forecasts, and warnings to inform the public, private, and academic sectors. Finally, through the stewardship work, NOAA uses the knowledge to protect people and the environment, including through work to protect and restore freshwater habitats. So a couple of examples. One, we can look at the Integrated Drought Management Program, IDMP. It's a global network co-sponsored by the Global Water Partnership and the World Meteorological Organization, designed to address issues related to drought monitoring, prediction, drought risk reduction, and management. Through NOAA's support, the IDMP helps to support stakeholders at all levels by providing policy and management guidance and by sharing scientific information, knowledge, and best practices for integrated drought management. Water also spans the full breadth of NOAA's research to application capabilities, including internationally, where NOAA contributes to transboundary water resources management to address issues including drought, extreme precipitation and flooding, water quality issues, and food insecurity. Since today's water event is framed with the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience under PREPARE, NOAA works with partner countries to identify and promote the enabling environments, nature-based solutions, and technology-driven solutions that contribute to sectoral goals while enhancing climate change adaptation and increasing global water security. As you mentioned, Assistant Secretary, Pillar 1 of PREPARE is all about increasing understanding of climate risk and adaptation solutions, supporting development, innovation, and delivery of climate services, decision support tools, and early warning systems, and developing current and future generations of adaptation professionals. This is NOAA's bread and butter, and we take the life cycle approach in this work, not only collecting data and conducting research, but making them operational. This life cycle approach means that we are observing and collecting data 24/7. And this approach is especially important when dealing with water, as water is constantly moving through the hydrologic cycle. NOAA is constantly processing and archiving information we gather, conducting research, and creating models. We produce tools, products, and educational resources, and we disseminate our forecasts and warnings, predictions and projections, maps, and other data visualization tools. Stakeholders apply our data and tools to make decisions. We assess our data, tools, and services and update and improve them as needed. And finally, we create opportunities that train the next generation of climate-smart workers who reflect the diversity of our country. The success of these activities can be measured in improved information and data on water, on precipitation, flooding, and water resources forecasting, as well as improved understanding of climate impacts and the hydrologic cycle.
Tremendous. Thank you so much. So we've just talked about the importance of information and adaptation efforts and the major role that water plays. I also want to focus on PREPARE's second pillar, preparing. Preparing plans and programs to mainstream and integrate adaptation, build relationships, and execute. Speaking of building relationships, Water Equity is joining us here today to highlight its long-standing private-public partnership with the U.S. Development Financing Organization. Gary, can you share with us the kinds of work that DFC and Water Equity fund for water infrastructure? And can you explain why improving water infrastructure is crucial to adaptation efforts?
For sure. First of all, it's great to be here. And I'm kind of the odd man out here. I'm not part of the U.S. government, but certainly we work in great collaboration with the U.S. government, and particularly the Development Finance Corporation, which is part of the U.S. government that invests in initiatives like ours that impact low-income countries, but also provide an attractive financial return. And so we're kind of that bridge in terms of water equity as an asset manager. Water Equity is the world's first asset manager that's focused exclusively on solving the global water and sanitation crisis for low-income populations, people living in poverty. That's kind of the core of what we do. And we've been very fortunate to kind of intersect with the Development Finance Corporations in its aims as well. And what that means is that by investing and actually leveraging more investment. So we've done 4 funds now at Water Equity, and the DFC has been engaged with 2 of those. Their $220 million of capital has allowed us to leverage an additional $100 million into the funds. Once we amass all that capital, what do we do with it? Well, we help people get access to small, affordable loans so that they can solve their own personal water and sanitation crisis. So we have a program called Water Credit, and when we raise the capital through Water Equity, what we're able to do is take that capital and break it into lots of loans, kind of wholesale loans to our financial partners around the world. These financial partners, some of them are microfinance institutions, some of them are banks, but basically we provide that debt capital to them so that they can do millions more of these micro loans so that people can get the water and sanitation loans that they need to improve their services. Sometimes that's just being able to pay a connection fee to the utility to get service. Oftentimes somebody will be paying a water vendor, $2 a day to buy water off the back of a tanker truck that isn't even fit for consumption because they don't have the $300 it takes to get a loan to pay the connection fee and to do the plumbing. So once they can get that loan, then all of a sudden they are not paying so much for water, and that's how the whole program can work. So basically what we see on the front lines of this is resilience being built into this as well. That's an important part of everything that we do with these loans to our financial partners to help households. And these loans, actually, about 90% of them are taken out by women because they're bearing the greatest burden of water, and these loans are repaid at a 98% rate. And so we have a really strong underlying asset that's really creating value for a lot of people to meet their water supply needs today, but then also to build in more resilience with the infrastructure that we're looking at as well. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So one of Prepare's other sectoral priorities is food security. Jeremy, how does USDA build climate resilience into food and water systems to better withstand current and future shocks and longer-term stresses? And how does USDA improve food system productivity by using climate and water-smart approaches?
Thank you for the question. I will apologize in advance to my fellow panelists, assistant secretary, those in attendance and viewing. I have to leave a little early. But thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to answer this question on Food and Water Day here at the COP, and for giving me an opportunity to shed some light on the work that USDA is doing to promote climate resilience and water management in ag and working lands. First, I think it's important to recognize that climate resilience and productivity goals are context and ultimately determined by individual land users. USDA supports this work for American land users by approaching it and providing them with the best available information and analysis. Water challenges require solutions that are practical, that are evidence-based. So our Ag Research Service, or ARS, Water Research Vision 2015 plan, maps out our multi-interdisciplinary and research approaches, partnerships, and tools for sustainable water management. We also know that science and data has to be a part of this solution as well. Science and data have to be a part of this solution as well. So one of the tools that are being used to support this is a tool called Soil Water Assessment Tool, or SWAT, which is a cool name as far as acronyms go, but it's an even cooler tool. And this tool is used to model and assess water resources across a wide range of climates, as well as at varying scales. So having these tools is one part of the equation, but it's also equally important to make them accessible. So if you were fortunate enough to hear the panel just ahead of this, you heard a lot about our climate hubs, which are regional based in the U.S., as well as we have an international climate hub that's newer, that provides access to information, including tools like SWAT. There's also the Water Information Center, which is another resource for producers and land managers. But we also have a program it's a mitigation program, and I know this is an adaptation panel, but it's called Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities. And this program is targeted at reducing greenhouse gas emissions while exploring new markets for producers producing products using climate smart practices. But there's also co-benefits and adaptation benefits. And the whole point of that program is to look and assess the approaches that are being implemented across the varying ag products and commodities that are being produced and sharing that information forward. And there's a number of projects that include water utilization and efficiency that will be applicable and shareable. And finally, I just want to talk a little bit about the bipartisan infrastructure law that was mentioned earlier as being historic, and we're not left out of that, as our Natural Resource Conservation Service was provided with $918 million for projects that were focused on previously underserved communities. This includes building new dams, flood prevention projects, as well as improving watershed infrastructures. In the first 2 years, these investments include $616 million spanning over 238 projects to restore watershed through the Watershed Protection and Flood Prevention Program, as well as rehabilitating aging dams through the Watershed Rehabilitation Program. This is over 49 states. There's also $268 million for emergency watershed projects in 17 states. And last, I think it's important to touch on also the work that's happening in communities to protect their health and the environment by maintaining and upgrading community drinking and wastewater systems. Sorry about that. This was nearly a $30 million investment made through our EQIP program, or Environmental Quality Improvement Incentive Program, over next fiscal year through the Water Smart Initiative. We coordinated these investments to improve water conservation and drought resilience across 16 water states, which complements the bipartisan infrastructure law funds provided by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Those numbers are so big. It's so exciting. We're just in a really exciting time in terms of the level of investment that we're making in this space. Now, while fragility is not per se a pillar of prepare, fragility and conflict can affect water resources and hinder the success of adaptation and resilience building activities. People in fragile settings are 8 times more likely to lack access to safe water. Administrator Esposito, how is USAID working to reduce water-related drivers of and vulnerabilities resulting from fragility, more frequent conflicts, and extreme weather events, and how do these efforts build resilience in local communities?
Well, thank you very much for the question and inviting me to join this really distinguished panel. Our opening scene setter talked about the climate crisis essentially being a crisis of water. Having spent many, many years in the humanitarian sphere, the image that comes to my mind is an image from the Horn of Africa, where you've seen a woman and her children across a barren landscape, leaving their homes in search of water, having lost their livestock, having not enough food, and going to displaced camps. I'm thinking of the 20 million people in the Horn of Africa who faced 5 consecutive failed rains and ended up with one of the largest humanitarian emergencies in the world. Was fundamentally a crisis of water, and there are many more examples. The things that some of USAID is doing that I want to emphasize here is that we are showing up with development dollars, multi-year investments in very fragile and conflict-affected places to put in systems-level solutions alongside that really vast and robust humanitarian action that we always undertake and that we are known for. We have a water strategy that is working in some of the most conflict affected areas, and I think we have 22 priority countries. We're focused on water. Roughly half of them are in really fragile and conflict affected places. So places like regions of Mali, Haiti, South Sudan, Ethiopia, and the like. So really challenging contexts. That's because the majority of people forecasted to be left behind without even the most basic water access are in those parts of the world. So increasingly our approach is integrated. We're not just looking for a water point solution, but we're looking for solutions that are delivering on water security, food security, natural resource management, and reduction of tensions in conflict. And how do we do that? We are increasingly connecting our some $475 million that we spend a year in water with our significant resources in food security to create things that combine infrastructure with watershed management type approaches that deliver on sustained access to water at the household level, sustained access to water for livestock and farming, sustained access to water for, in some cases, wildlife, if you're in an area like northern Kenya, which really relies on the tourism industry, and all within an area that is helping to retain water at the watershed level so that there's better control, more water availability during drought seasons and more access to controlled water, if you will, during the flooding seasons. This approach is increasingly combining infrastructure with water governance issues, which in a fragile context are really important, not just to effectively manage those water resources, but also to bring civil society and government and communities together around a shared understanding of mutual accountability and how they're going to work together to manage those resources. Those community level dialogue issues are in our water strategy, not just within countries, but increasingly transboundary. And those are issues that we all know are going to become more acute, and we are setting up the infrastructure and the programs that will allow us to help with that as well. Finally, I would just call out that these combined investments are increasingly focused on nature-based solutions, green infrastructure, along with gray infrastructure, and those governance commitments that are fundamentally precursors to effective climate adaptation. We have committed in our climate strategy to improve, conserve, or restore 100 million hectares of land by 2030.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you. So I'm going to do a second round of questions, and what I'll say is if we have time at the end, I'll give the speakers an opportunity as a lightning round to get in, any last-minute closing 1-minute thoughts at the end if we have time. But let me go back to you, Dr. Morgan. How does NOAA, and on the topic of decision support, how does NOAA build the capacity of water users across sectors and around the world to enable communities to make the most informed decisions on water and climate adaptation efforts?
Okay, thank you for that question. And there's a reason that I'm sitting here with several colleagues, many of whom are from the United States government. NOAA can bring diplomacy, technology, science, and engagement skills to the table that complement our sister agencies' missions. In our projects around the globe, NOAA serves both as a convener of stakeholders and a leader in capacity building, training, and expertise sharing. NOAA is recognized as a global leader in climate data and information, and that unique role allows us to collaborate closely to provide developing countries, particularly countries most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, relevant hydrometeorological data and resources, as well as tools to help them plan and prepare for these impacts. NOAA helps promote cooperation on shared waters through the development of climate products and services, as well as to support support to determine the data requirements, optimum data processing techniques, and suitable presentation methods for predictions and products distributed to users of climate, hydrologic, meteorological, space weather, and oceanographic information. We continue to expand our climate-smart, weather-ready nations programs internationally to build capacity in countries to adapt and become more resilient to the increasing impacts of climate change and prepare for the unpredictability of weather and climate hazards to save lives and property. We work with the small island developing states in the Caribbean and the Pacific regions, as well as continuing our work in Africa to help build their multi-hazard early warning systems, which was discussed in a previous panel earlier today, through end-to-end observation system support and forecast support through capacity building training. This work is vital to saving lives from extreme weather and tropical systems. On that point, two of NOAA's key deliverables here at COP28 focus on water specifically. First, expanding the multi-hazard early warning system in Africa. In support of PREPARE, NOAA and the Department of State and USAID are investing over $15 million to expand end-to-end early warning systems in Africa. This work includes African National Meteorological and Hydrological Services and regional institutions to expand the ability of African nations to monitor, forecast, and respond to multiple hazards such as extreme rainfall, drought, and heat on a sub-seasonal timescale. NOAA will also work in the south and east of Africa with key partners to invest in data infrastructure that will improve hydrometeorological open data access sharing. And finally, NOAA is partnering with the Group on Earth Observations, or GEO, to expand streamflow prediction services throughout the region through the GEO Global Water Sustainability Initiative, known as GEO IOWSS. These collective efforts over the next 5 years will help African countries establish and enhance their flooding early warning systems for improved climate resilience and preparedness. With 80 years of historical streamflow data, these systems will help address flooding, drought, and climate change-related hydrological effects. And secondly, NOAA is working to enhance storm surge forecasting and preparedness in the Central Caribbean. NOAA and the USAID are investing $750,000 to work with the Bahamas, Dominican Republic, and the Cayman Islands to prepare and better forecast storm surge risk from tropical cyclones. This includes expanding a real-time storm surge monitoring network to improve regional data and observations related to storm surge hazards. Through implementation of the storm surge mapping in the Bahamas, high-resolution inundation maps will highlight the resulting risk of storm surge flooding from Category 1 to 5 storms. These maps will raise awareness about the inherent risk storm surge poses for the islands and allow residents and emergency managers to better plan and develop mitigation strategies in the event a hurricane impacts their community. I understand that Jamaica will be included in this network next year.
Well, as a native of South Florida, I can tell you that early warning systems and the accuracy of our early warning systems in that part of the world is something that people have just come to almost take for granted. And so, in the face of climate change, making those systems even more accurate is all the more important. So we're very grateful for those efforts. Gary, my second question for you is one that I actually have myself, which is, can you explain the difference between private sector participation versus privatization of water infrastructure?
Sure. And first of all, I think it's great what my colleagues are doing to kind of do the foundational work that's needed to make sure those water resources are there, the utilities are there, the investable assets are there to make water resilient infrastructure possible. And I think if we look to your question, there is a real difference between privatization and public-private partnership. And I think we've seen a lot of examples, not a lot, but we've seen several examples over the past decade or two of privatization of water resources, water utilities in low-income countries not going well. And the core of it is that those basic assets shouldn't, the water resources themselves and much of the water infrastructure shouldn't be owned privately, but there's nothing wrong, in my view, of private sector companies participating with the public sector to either enhance the infrastructure, to to receive concessions to operate the infrastructure, and to do billing and things like that, as long as it's done in a regulatory environment that preserves the right to water, the right to affordable water. And so that's what we see happening as we go into our next type of fund. So we have a lot of corporate investors now that are complementing the DFC, the Development Finance Corporation capital that's coming into our funds. So our most recently closed fund, Starbucks investing in that, Ecolab's investing in that, DuPont's investing in that. And I think it's critical to remember that we need to crowd in more funding like this, and that's what the DFC wants to do. Because this is a $1.7 trillion problem to solve the global water supply and sanitation crisis, and we've got to have those types of funds involved. I mentioned before how we have worked to help about 60 million people get microloans so that they can get connected to these utilities and become rate-paying customers, which makes utilities more bankable. What we're doing now with our next fund is our Water and Climate Resilience Fund. We're moving from investing in microloan portfolios into investing in infrastructure projects, either through growth companies that are providing goods and services to utilities to enhance and make their resources, their infrastructure more climate resilient, or through project finance as well. And so we see the need to drive more capital from the private sector to complement public sector capital to make this happen in order to achieve this vision that we all have of having this climate resilience water and sanitation services, particularly for low-income populations. And that's the lens through which we're always looking at this, making sure that the least among us who had the least to do with climate change are staying at the front of the line in terms of the impact that we deliver.
Great. Thank you very much. Jeremy, my second question for you. USDA does a lot of fantastic work in the United States, but I know that USDA also works internationally. How is USDA sharing expertise and information abroad and with international partners?
Thank you for the question. So it's interesting. We've made these historic investments, and we do have an international presence, but a lot of the work that I think we've been very successful at is connecting our tools and resources and collaborations and packaging those and sharing them with international audiences. But before I get to some of the more international focused work, I want to just raise up the work that we have domestically that connects with international stakeholders. So the work of our climate hubs, the work of the Water Agriculture Information Center, that information is accessible to producers, landowners, land managers everywhere. So oftentimes what's referenced there is very usable in an international context. And speaking of the domestic climate hubs, I mentioned the new international climate hub, which is a product actually that started in conversations with Prepare and the interagency. We wanted to look at ways that we can take the work happening in the domestic climate hubs and share that information forward in the international context. So we were very excited just last year, actually, or earlier this year, to officially launch the International Climate Hub after announcing it last year at COP27. So one of the products of the International Climate Hub, again, connecting resources and tools with international audiences, was a public webinar that featured nature-based and unconventional solutions to address agricultural water scarcity. This webinar was put forth in collaboration with the FAO, as well as it included support for the FAO-led Global Framework on Water Scarcity in Agriculture, otherwise WASAG. And since I mentioned SWAT earlier, you don't remember that acronym, it's Soil Water Assessment Tool. Let me clarify on how this is used internationally. There's an active international partnership that supports the ongoing development and applications of SWAT, including international user groups, as well as conferences and workshops. We also use satellite observation data of water in our reporting crop production. We have a monthly circular, it's called the World Agriculture Production, that routinely focuses on water issues, especially droughts, flooding, and reservoir storage for irrigation. The water observations are used with other data resources to help us to understand the shortfalls in crop production in the context of national, regional, and global markets and trade flows for agricultural commodities. There's also several programs we have that focus on climate-smart agriculture, but also have water implications as well and provide water resource management. One of the projects I like to highlight is one of our Food for Progress projects from last year, or this year, I should say, 2023. It's a $27 million project in the Gambia that focuses on the horticulture sector, but includes activities in the application of improved water management technologies and conservation practices. And also, just following up on a previous comment by the Assistant Secretary, we're also engaged internationally through collaborations. One example of that is our recently deployed on missions for Nepal and Romania through the Ambassadors Water Experts Program. We also frequently collaborate with USAID across a number of different projects. Just highlight a few. One was recently deployed technical team that went to Peru to improve the country's composite drought indicator for drought monitoring. Also, going back to 2019, we actually provided a water security advisor to USAID in Kenya to help increase access to sustainable water and to make water more user and climate smart. And finally, I'm with the Foreign Ag Service as part of the United States Department of Agriculture, but our presence is most felt overseas through our embassies and our attachés and our counselors who are doing the work on the ground and collaborating with the interagency to bring forth expertise, connect with us us in Washington, back in Washington, and to bring forth expertise where we can to support these projects. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy. Okay. Administrator Esposito, what kind of tools are currently in the USG toolbox to bridge humanitarian assistance with longer-term development needs and climate adaptation efforts?
Well, as you know, USAID is a humanitarian organization, a development organization, and a peace-building organization. And we actually bring all three of those capacities to bear in fragile and conflict-affected settings. We know that the humanitarians play a critical role both in disaster preparedness, increasingly important as the shocks and stresses become more acute. We have more investment in that area. But then the way they actually deliver their relief response can also be really, really important from a resilience building point of view. To the extent that they are relying on local markets and local actors to deliver that relief, as opposed to sort of surging in a lot of materials and goods from the outside, they can reinforce capacities and systems. And you'll see, I think, an evolution of our humanitarian response that's increasingly focused on localization. So that's, I think, just an important part of the USAID mission in these areas. And this relates to water infrastructure, water water repair, water trucking, and the like. The peace builders also are, I used to be in the peace building sphere, so I don't know if there are any peace builders out there, but I give you a shout out and express deep appreciation for how important that work is when it comes to resilience and adaptation building that we don't always think about. They provide important conflict analysis that helps humanitarians and development actors understand the latent, proximate, immediate causes of conflict and how what we do and how we do it can either connect communities or divide communities. Resources going in are usually not just neutral, right? So that's a really important contribution. There's also conflict resolution skill building with communities and with governments, often dialogues that bring those together. And I know AID has supported randomized control trials that show that a peace building intervention can reduce conflict over natural resources, and it's not very expensive. So I think that's something we need to think more about. And then finally, we are really then have these long-term development investments that we're bringing into these fragile and conflict-affected areas. There was here at COP a declaration on climate relief, recovery, and peace that I think I want to commend and say that we are very interested in having that conversation more about how peace builders in particular are contributing to adaptation and resilience building in communities as the climate agenda, as climate shocks become more and more acute. And finally, we have a unique funding mechanism, which we've never done before as far as I can recall, which is we've developed a mechanism for our aid missions around the world to tap into that's called Fragile Waters. And it was co-designed by relief, development, and peace practitioners who came together and asked, what are the capacities and support that missions need, and how can this mechanism be helpful? And it is new, just recently announced, and it allows missions to call forward the support and skills of any of those practitioners that they may need. They can use it to anticipate and reduce related drivers of conflict over water, or to address water shocks after they occur, whether it's because of conflict, extreme weather, migration, whatever the shock may be. They can conduct analysis, strengthen capacity of local organizations, or provide direct assistance or shared learning. All of this to say that these different practitioners are coming together around the climate agenda. We've already tapped into this mechanism in Haiti. As you see, extreme drought in the Northeast, creating conflict, transboundary or conflict even, looking at an analysis, the drivers of that and scenarios that could help mitigate the tensions around those water resources.
That's wonderful. Well, we have just enough time for me to go back to each of you and ask for just some final reflections. And if you can, this was not in the plan, but if you can, think about a future COP. Pick a year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whatever makes sense in your world, and reflect on or forecast where what you would like to be reporting on. If you were here 5 or 10 years from now and you were at this panel and you were looking back on the successes in this space, what would be some of the things you would hope to be able to say about the work in this area? So, because that's a little bit of a surprise, I'm not going to go in order. I'll just ask for a volunteer to go first.
I'll jump. I think if we could report massive reductions in the need for humanitarian aid, it would be a huge win. That's what adaptation is about.
Wow. And that's a great ambition. I love that.
And that's a great segue, because I think what I would see as success is that the capital markets have responded in a way so that it doesn't all have to be built on the back of development assistance and philanthropy. And I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to kind of get people to suspend disbelief that you can actually connect the global capital markets and provide an attractive rate of return and create the financial plumbing between that market and women making a few dollars a day in terms of meeting their water and sanitation needs. And that's the evidence that we've built. And so for me, we need to invest, billions of dollars more from the capital markets to, build on some of these solutions that are out there so that we can solve the crisis.
That's great. Dr. Morgan.
Right. So one of the pillars of Prepare, that pillar one, has been mentioned, is that knowledge, information is power. And so one of the pillars actually of NOAA's strategic plan is the realization of a climate-ready nation. And that's a nation in which individuals, communities, and businesses have the relevant information, have access to the relevant information in an equitable fashion to make the critical decisions that they need for their livelihoods, their lives, their means of work. And so I would hope that by, let's say, 2030, we've not only established within the U.S. a climate-ready nation, but we have a climate-ready world, so that they have access to the information that's critically important for them to be able to make their decisions to achieve what my colleagues on stage have talked about, businesses in the capital markets responding, as well as a decreased need for humanitarian assistance.
So marshaling a toolbox of know-how and expertise to increase global prosperity, to reduce the need for humanitarian aid in the future, and increasing the possibility of peace, that's pretty great. That's a pretty wonderful vision. And so, I don't know, I'll be back then in 2030 to hear, or whenever it is, in 5 years to hear that report out. That's tremendous. I'd like for the audience to please show our appreciation for these wonderful panelists. And I know that all three of them represent probably hundreds, if not thousands, of colleagues who are engaged at all levels of this work. So we're grateful to all of them as well. I'd like to help us close out this afternoon session to invite Tamara Kaufman-Wittes, who is the director of the Office of Foreign Assistance at the State Department. Please, closing remarks. Thank you.
And I really want to thank you and all of the panelists for winding up with a vision for the future, because I think that all the work that we've done over the course of this COP and the work to come in the next few days, it's tough and it can sometimes feel daunting, and it's important for us to keep our eyes on the prize. So thank you for that. So I'm the Director of Foreign Assistance at the State Department. That is a bureau that coordinates across state and USAID all of our official assistance resources. In other words, my job is to make sure that our assistance is effective and impactful, that we're making good investments. And, when you think about investments in water, the World Bank has found that $1 of investment in water can deliver on average almost $7 in returns in terms of outcome. That is a pretty good investment. And so, it's important for us to remember just how big the payoff is at the official level before we even get to private sector resources. In FY22, the United States reached $2.3 billion dedicated to Prepare, to the pillars that you've heard about today. A lot of those efforts outlined today were part of that $2.3 billion, and those are helping us partner with governments who are doing assessment and planning and budgeting for adaptation and water management. They support governments in scaling up their financing, and they support the kinds of partnerships you heard about today. But it's equally clear that governments alone cannot generate all the funds that are necessary. If we're going to achieve SDG 6, ensuring access to water and sanitation for all, the UN estimates that's $1 trillion problem, as you said, Gary. So meeting that demand means that we need innovative approaches to finance that leverage the dollars I wield to activate the dollars in the private sector. We are doing that not only through DFC, as you heard today, the Development Finance Corporation, but also through USAID and through the Bureau of Oceans, International Environment, and Scientific Affairs. So we are really firing on all cylinders to leverage every U.S. taxpayer dollar to bring in private capital to meet the needs. Let me leave you with a final point, which is that people often first experience climate impacts through water, through their everyday engagement with water. And so water is also an area where we can make early differences in adaptation. And we can do that every day. We have huge opportunities here to make a difference by accelerating our investments in water, jumpstarting climate adaptation finance, and taking a big step toward resilience. So with that, let me thank all of our panelists again. Thank you all for being with us here at the U.S. Pavilion today. Thank you.